This is a reading of the BFG Chapter 9, The Bloodbottler. Suddenly, a tremendous thumping noise came from outside the cave entrance, with a voice like thunder shouted, "Runt! Is you there, Runt? I is hearing you jabbling. Who is you jabbling to, Runt?" "Look out!" cried the BFG. "It's the Bloodbottler." But before he had finished speaking, the stone was rolled aside, and a 50-foot giant, more than twice as tall and wide as the BFG, came striding into the cave. He was naked except for a dirty little piece of cloth around his bottom. Sophie was on the tabletop. The enormous, partly eaten schnozcumber was laying near her. She ducked behind it. The creature came clumping into the cave and stood towering over the BFG. "Who was you jabbling to in here just now?" he boomed. "I is jabbling to myself," the BFG answered. "Pitiful fizz!" shouted the blood bottler. "Bug swallow!" he boomed. "You is talking to a human being. That's what I is thinking." "No, no!" cried the BFG. "Yes, yes!" boomed the blood bottler. "I is guessing you is snitched away a human being and brought it back to your bunghole as a pet. So now I is winkling it out and guzzling it as extra snacks before my supper." Poor BFG was very nervous. "There's no one in here," he stammered. "But what I don't you leave me alone." The blood bottler pointed a finger as large as a tree trunk at the BFG. "Runty little scumscrewer," he shouted. "Piffling little swishfigler. Swimpy little bottlewort. Pruny little pog swizzler. I is now going to search the primroses." He grabbed the BFG by the arm. "And you is going to help me do it. Us together is going to winkle out this tasteful little human being," he shouted. The BFG had intended to whisk Sophie off of the table as soon as he had the chance to hide her behind his back, but now there was no hope of doing this. Sophie peered around the chewed off end of the enormous schnozcumber, watching the two giants as they moved away down the cave. The blood bottler was a gruesome sight. His skin was reddish brown. There was black hair sprouting out on his chest and arms and on his stomach. The hair on his head was long and dark and tangled. His foul face was round and squashy looking. His eyes were tiny black holes. The nose was small and flat, but the mouth was huge. It spread right across the face, almost ear to ear. It had lips that were two gigantic purple frankfurters lying one on top of the other. Craggy yellow teeth stuck out between the two purple frankfurter lips, and rivers of spit ran down over the chin. It was not the least difficult to believe that this ghastly brute ate men, women, and children every night. The blood bottler, still holding the BFG by the arm, was examining the rows and rows of bottles. "You and your pibbling bottles," he shouted. "What is you putting in them?" "Nothing that would interest you," the BFG answered. "You is not, or you is only interested in guzzling human beings. And you is a doughty dog, Swaggler," cried the blood bottler. Soon the blood bottler would be coming back, Sophie told herself, and he was bound to search the tabletop. But she couldn't possibly jump off the table. It was 12 feet high. She'd break a leg. Schnozcumber, although it was as thick as a perambulator, was not going to hide her if the blood bottler picked it up. She examined the chewed off end. It had large seeds in the middle, each one as big as a melon. They were embedded in soft, slimy stuff. Taking care to stay out of sight, Sophie reached forward and scooped away half a dozen of these seeds. This left a hole in the middle of the schnozcumber large enough for her to crouch in, so long as she rolled herself up into a ball. She crawled into it. It was a wet and slimy hiding place, but it did not. Uh, but what did that matter? But what did that matter if it was going to save her from being eaten? The blood bottler and the BFG were coming back towards the table now. The BFG was nearly fainting with fear. Any moment, he was telling himself, Sophie would be discovered and eaten. Suddenly, the blood bottler grabbed the half-eaten schnozcumber. The BFG stared at the bare table. Sophie, where is you? He thought desperately. You cannot possibly be jumping off that high table. So where is you hiding, Sophie? So this is the filthing, rotten glubbage you was eating, boomed the blood bottler. Blood bottler holding up the partly eaten schnozcumber. You must be cockles to be guzzling such rub squash. For a moment, the blood bottler seemed to have forgotten about his search for Sophie. The BFG decided to lead him further off track. That is the scrumdiddly-umptious schnozcumber, he said. I is guzzling it lick gleefully every night and day. Is you never trying a schnozcumber, blood bottler? Human beings is juicier, the blood bottler said. Oh, you is talking rummy tot, the BFG said, growing braver by the second. He was thinking that if he could get the blood bottler to take one bite of the repulsive vegetable, the sheer foulness of its flavor would send him bellowing out of the cave. I is happy to let you sample it, the BFG went on, but please, when you see how truly glumptious it is, do not be guzzling the whole thing. Leave me a little snitchet for my supper. The blood bottler stared suspiciously with small piggy eyes at the schnozcumber. Sophie, crouching inside of the chewed off end, began to tremble all over. You is not switch fiddling me, is you? Said the blood bottler. Never, cried the BFG passionately. Take a bite. I am positive you will be shouting at, oh, how scrumdiddly-umptious this wonder veg is. The BFG could see the very greedy blood bottler's mouth beginning to water more than ever at the prospect of extra food. Vegetables is very good for you, he went on. It is not healthsome always to be eating meaty things. Just this once, the blood bottler said. I is going to taste these rotsome eats of yours. But I is warning that if it is filsome, I is smashing it over your sludgy little head. He picked up the schnozcumber. He began raising it on the long journey to his mouth, some 50 feet in the air. Sophie wanted to scream, don't! But that would have been an even more certain death. Crouching among the slimy seeds, she felt herself being lifted up and up and up. Suddenly, there was a crunch as the blood bottler bit a huge hunk off the end. Sophie saw his yellow teeth clamping together a few inches from her head. There was utter darkness. She was in his mouth. She caught a whiff of his evil-smelling breath. It stank of bad meat. She waited for the teeth to go crunch once more. She prayed that she would be killed quickly. Ouch! Roared the blood bottler. Oh, blouch! And then he spat all of the great lumps of schnozcumber and that were in his mouth, as well as Sophie herself, went shooting across the cave. If Sophie had struck the stony wall of the cave, she would most certainly have been killed. Instead, she hit the soft folds of the BFG's cloak hanging against the wall. She dropped to the ground, half stunned. She crawled under the hem of the cloak, and there she crouched. You little swine bugler, roared the blood bottler. You little pig swiller. He rushed to the BFG and smashed what was left of the schnozcumber over his head. Fragments of the filthy vegetable splashed all over the cave. You is not loving it? The BFG asked innocently, rubbing his head. Loving it? Yelled the blood bottler. That is the most disgusting taste that is ever touching my teeth. You must be boggles to be swallowing sludge like that. Every night you could be galloping off happy as a hamburger and gobbling juicy human beans. Eating human beings is wrong and evil, the BFG said. It is guzzly and glumptuous, shouted the blood bottler. And tonight I is galloping off to Chile to swallow a few human chili beans. Is you wishing to know why I is choosing Chile? I is not wishing to know anything, said the BFG, said, very dignified. I is choosing Chile, the blood bottler said, because I is fed up with the taste of Eskimos. It is important I has plenty of cold eats in scudding hot weather, and the next coldest thing to an Eskimo is a chili bean. Human beans from Chile is very chilly. Horrible, the BFG said. You ought to be ashamed. The other giants is all saying they is wanting to gallop off to England tonight to guzzle school childers. The blood bottler said, I is very fond indeed of English school childers. They has a nice inky booky flavor. Perhaps I will change my mind and go to England with them. You is disgusting, the BFG said. And you is an insult to the giant peoples, shouted the blood bottler. You is not fit to be a giant. You is a squinky little squiddler. You is a pibblin' little pitsqueak. You is a cream puff nut. With that, the horrible blood-bottling giant strode out of the cave. The BFG ran to the cave entrance and quickly rolled the stone back into place. Sophie, he whispered. Sophie, where is you, Sophie? Sophie emerged from under the hem of the black cloak. I'm here, she said. The BFG picked her up and held her tenderly in the palm of his hand. Oh, I am so happy to be finding you all in one lump, he said. I was in his mouth, Sophie said. You was what? Cried the BFG. Sophie told him what had happened, and there I was telling him to eat the filthsome snozzcumber, and you was all the time inside it, the BFG cried. Not much fun, Sophie said. Just look at you, you poor little children, cried the BFG. You is covered in snozzcumber and giant spit. He set to cleaning her up as best he could. I is hating those other giants more than ever now, he said. You know what I should like? What? Sophie said. I should like to find a way of disappearing them, every single one. I'd be glad to help you, Sophie said. Let me see if I can't think up a way of doing it.